Idiots. There is something nobody tells you about empaths, and once you hear this, you will never look at them the same way again. Most people assume that because empaths feel deeply, idiots, because they absorb the emotions of everyone around them, because they seem soft and gentle and endlessly patient, that when someone hurts them, they simply forgive and move on. Maybe they cry alone. D8s. Maybe they write in a journal. Maybe they pray for the person who wronged them. And the person who caused the damage walks away, thinking they got away with it, thinking the empath is too sensitive, radiates too passive, too spiritually focused to ever fight back. And that assumption is the most dangerous mistake a person can make, because empaths do not get revenge in the way most people think of revenge. They do not slash tires. They do not spread rumors. They do not make phone calls designed to destroy reputations. They do something far more sophisticated, far more permanent, and honestly, radiates far more devastating to the person who wronged them. And by the time the other person realizes what happened, it is already over. I want you to really sit with that for a moment. Radiates. Because what I am about to walk you through is not just psychology. It is a pattern I have studied in human behavior for years. It is something I have seen play out in hundreds of relationships. It's in military interrogations, in high-stakes negotiations, in families, in friendships, in business partnerships. The empath who has been pushed too far does not explode. They evolve, and evolution, when it happens to someone who already understands human nature at a deep level, is the most quietly destructive force on the planet. Let me start by telling you something about how empaths process pain. It's because this is where everything begins. When a normal person gets hurt, their first instinct is usually reactive. They feel the wound and they want to respond to it immediately. There is anger. Radiates. There is the urge to say something, to do something, to make the other person feel what they felt. That is a very human, very understandable response. But empaths are wired differently. Not better, not worse, just differently. When an empath gets hurt, especially when they get hurt by someone they genuinely trusted and loved, something unusual happens inside them. They do not just feel the pain. They study it. They sit inside it. They turn it over in their hands like a detective examining evidence. And because empaths have spent their entire lives reading emotional undercurrents in other people, they begin doing something that most people never do. They trace the wound back to its origin. They understand exactly what happened, why it happened, what the other person was motivated by, radiates, what patterns led to this moment, and most importantly, what it reveals about the person who hurt them. That process of understanding is not passive. It is not forgiveness. It is intelligence gathering. Radiates. And the person who hurt the empath has no idea it is happening. They think the empath is just processing emotions. They think the quiet means acceptance. They think the distance means weakness. Radiates. But what they are actually watching is someone building a completely new architecture for their life and permanently removing the person who hurt them from the foundation. Radiates. Here is what most people fundamentally misunderstand about empaths. They think empathy means endless tolerance. They confuse sensitivity with submission. D8s. They assume that because an empath can feel what you feel, that they will always excuse what you do. And for a long time, honestly, that assumption is correct. Empaths do excuse more than they should. E8s. They tolerate longer than is healthy. They give more chances than any reasonable person would. Not because they are weak, because they are genuinely trying to see the best in people. Radiates. They are genuinely hoping that if they just love hard enough, if they just understand deeply enough, the person in front of them will choose to become better. Radiates. That hope is both the empath's greatest strength and their most exploited vulnerability, because certain types of people, and if you have spent any time studying dark personality traits, you already know exactly the types I am talking about. Certain types of people find that hope irresistible. D8s. They see an empath's willingness to understand as an invitation to keep misbehaving. They mistake forgiveness for permission. D8s. They treat every second chance as evidence that there will always be another one. And they keep pushing. They keep taking. They keep lying, manipulating, diminishing, undermining. They keep doing it right up until the moment the empath reaches a threshold that most people do not even know exists. Researchers who study emotional intelligence have found something fascinating. Highly empathic individuals tend to have what you might call a delayed but absolute breaking point. Unlike people who react quickly and recover quickly, empaths absorb a great deal before they respond. But when they do respond, when they finally reach that internal line that has been crossed one too many times, their response is not emotional in the way you might expect. It becomes almost clinical, almost cold. And that coldness is the first sign that something has permanently shifted. When an empath goes cold on you, it is not a phase, it is a verdict. Radiates, and here is where their version of revenge begins. Not with action, with withdrawal. Complete, total, surgical withdrawal. E8s. Now I want you to understand how different this is from what most people do when they are angry. When most people withdraw, they are doing it to make you notice them. They want you to chase them. E8s. They want the other person to realize what they are losing and come running back. That is emotional protest. That is still engagement, just engagement in reverse. Idiots. What the empath does is completely different. When an empath withdraws, they are not trying to make you chase them. They genuinely stop caring whether you do. D8s. They are not creating distance to get your attention. They are creating distance because you no longer have their attention. radiates. That distinction is subtle, but the lived experience of it is absolutely devastating for the person on the receiving end. Radiates. Think about what it feels like to have someone who once made you feel completely understood, completely seen, completely held in their emotional awareness. Radiates. Think about what it feels like when that person simply stops, not in an angry way, not in a dramatic way, just stops, the warmth disappears, the interest disappears. The curiosity about your life disappears, and you are left in a silence that somehow feels louder than any argument ever could, because most of us, whether we admit it or not, have grown accustomed to being held in someone's awareness. We know when we are being thought about. We feel when someone genuinely cares. And when an empath removes that from your life, the absence is felt at a level that is almost biological. There is research in attachment theory that explains exactly why this is so painful. Human beings are wired for connection. Our nervous systems literally regulate based on our relationships with key people in our lives. When someone we have become deeply connected to suddenly withdraws their emotional presence, our nervous system reads it as a threat, not a social inconvenience, a threat. The body responds with the same anxiety it would to physical danger, and the cruelest part of what the empath does, not cruelly intentionally, but effectively, is that their withdrawal is so complete, so genuine, so devoid of drama, that there is nothing to grab onto. There is no argument to resolve. There is no misunderstanding to clear up. There is no door left slightly open. There is just the quiet, permanent, immovable fact that you are no longer in their world. And while you are sitting with that, while you are trying to figure out what happened and whether there is anything you can do to fix it, the empath is already doing something that will widen the gap between you and them every single day. They are growing. I do not mean that as a cliche. I mean it in a very specific, very measurable way. Empaths who have been deeply hurt and have made the decision to remove someone from their lives do not just move on. They transform. The pain becomes fuel, not for bitterness, not for obsession with what was done to them, but for an almost ferocious investment in their own development. I have watched this happen in people I have worked with. I have seen individuals who were emotionally crushed by a relationship, who seemed like they might never recover, and within months of making the decision to truly let go, they became almost unrecognizable, not because they pretended the pain did not exist, but because they alchemized it. They took the energy they had been pouring into trying to fix someone who did not want to be fixed, trying to love someone who did not know how to receive love, trying to hold together something that was fundamentally broken, and they redirected every drop of that energy into themselves, into their career, into their health, into their relationships with people who actually deserve their presence, into their own healing and understanding and growth. And the person who hurt them watches this from a distance. Maybe through mutual friends, maybe through social media, maybe just through the occasional update that filters back through the world. And they see the empath thriving, and something uncomfortable begins to stir in them, because there was always a part of them that believed the empath needed them, that the empath would fall apart without them. That the empath's depth of feeling was a weakness, a dependency, something that kept them tethered. And watching the empath not only survive but flourish without them dismantles that belief completely. And that dismantling is painful in a way that no direct act of revenge could ever achieve. You see, traditional revenge is external. It is something done to a person from the outside. And external wounds, while painful, can be explained away. They can be rationalized. They can be blamed on the other person's bitterness or instability. It radiates, but watching someone you hurt become the best version of themselves in your absence, that cannot be rationalized. That sits in a person's mind and quietly does its work. Radiates, because it forces a question that is almost impossible to sit with comfortably. What if I was the problem? That question, more than any argument, more than any confrontation, radiates. More than any act of visible revenge is what truly haunts people. And the empath does not plant that question deliberately. They plant it by simply becoming, by simply growing, by simply refusing to let what was done to them define the ceiling of their life. And that is the thing about empaths that people who hurt them almost never anticipate. They expect the empath to be broken by the experience. They expect collapse or bitterness or desperate attempts at reconciliation. What they do not expect is elevation. Let me go a little deeper into the psychology of what actually happens in the empath's inner world during this process, because I think it is important to understand this is not magic. It is not spiritual bypass. It is not simply positive thinking. It is a very specific psychological mechanism that empaths have access to more readily than most people. When an empath processes pain, they are simultaneously processing the emotional content of the experience and the interpersonal dynamics that created it. They are feeling the hurt and studying the hurt at the same time. And because they have spent a lifetime developing the ability to understand what drives human behavior, they tend to arrive at a level of clarity about what happened that most people never reach. They understand understand not just that they were betrayed, but why. They understand not just that they were manipulated, but how. They understand not just that someone was unkind to them, D8s, but what that unkindness reveals about the internal world of the person who was unkind. And that understanding does something remarkable. It removes the mystery. It removes the obsession. It's because obsession, most of the time, is really just unresolved confusion. We cannot stop thinking about people who hurt us partly because we cannot make sense of what they did. D8s. But when an empath reaches a full understanding of the dynamic, the obsession dissolves. There is nothing left to figure out, and without the obsession, the attachment loses its grip. D8s. And when the attachment loses its grip, the empath is free. Genuinely free, not performing freedom while secretly still checking to see if the other person noticed. Genuinely, internally, quietly free. And that freedom, for someone who once poured enormous amounts of emotional energy into a relationship that was slowly consuming them, that freedom is intoxicating. It becomes its own motivation. It becomes the foundation for a completely different kind of life. Now I want to talk about something that is a little more uncomfortable, because it is true and it deserves to be said directly. Radiates. Part of what makes the empath's response to being wrong so effective, so quietly devastating, is something that the person who hurt them often does not discover until it is far too late. Yates. Empaths remember everything. Not in a resentful way, not in an obsessive way, but in a structural way. They have been paying close attention to every interaction, every inconsistency. D8s. Every moment where words did not match behavior, every time they felt something was off, but told themselves they were imagining it. All of that information has been quietly cataloged. Radiates. And when the empath finally makes the decision to leave, to withdraw, to close the door, they are not leaving impulsively. They are leaving with complete clarity. They know exactly what happened. Radiates. They know exactly who they were dealing with. They know exactly what they're walking away from. And because they know it so completely, there is no going back. Radiates. This is something that people who try to re-enter an empath's life after burning them discover in a deeply uncomfortable way. Radiates. They expect the door to be open because empaths are known for their compassion. They expect another chance because empaths have given so many chances before. Yates. But what they find is a door that is not just closed, it is no longer even recognized as a door. The empath has not locked it. They have simply moved somewhere that the door no longer leads to. Radiates, and standing outside it, knocking, apologizing, making promises has absolutely no effect because the empath is not behind it anymore. They are somewhere else entirely. Radiates. There is a concept in behavioral science called extinction. It refers to what happens when a behavior that was once rewarded stops being rewarded. The behavior continues for a while, radiates, sometimes intensifies because the person is used to getting a response. But when the response stops coming completely, eventually the behavior dies. Radiates. What the empath does when they fully withdraw is create the conditions for extinction. They stop rewarding the other person's behavior with any reaction at all. No anger, no sadness, no hope, no engagement, just the absence of response. And the person on the other end of that, if they have any capacity for self-reflection at all, is left entirely alone with their own behavior and its consequences. Radiates. I want to tell you something about the long-term aftermath of what happens to people who hurt empaths and then watch the empath move on fully. Radiates. Because this is the part that most videos and articles about empaths never get to. The people who wronged the empath rarely just get over it cleanly. There is usually a point, sometimes months later, sometimes years, where it resurfaces, where they see something that reminds them. Radiates. Where they reach a difficult moment in their own life and instinctively think of the person who once understood them completely, and they reach out. Or they want to reach out, and they discover that the number of people in their life who understand them the way that empath did is very small or non-existent, because empaths are rare in a specific way. Radiates. Not because they feel deeply, lots of people feel deeply, but because they combine feeling deeply with a genuine interest in understanding you, the real you, not the version you present publicly, but the actual messy, complicated interior of who you are. That combination is genuinely rare. And most people do not realize how rare it is until they no longer have access to it. And then the loss does not just feel personal. It feels existential. D8s. Like something essential has been removed from the texture of daily life. And meanwhile, the empath is doing extraordinarily well. Because here is the other thing about empaths that people miss. Yates. When they invest in themselves the way they once invested in the relationship, they tend to get outsized results because everything they were doing for the other person, the emotional attunement, Yates, the deep listen, the genuine care, the investment in someone else's growth and well-being, they begin doing for themselves. Yates. And most empaths have neglected themselves quite seriously for quite a long time. So when they turn that care inward, the results can be dramatic. Health improves, careers accelerate, radiates, creative expression opens up, relationships with genuinely healthy people deepen. Their entire reality restructures around something more solid, more real, more aligned with who they actually are. Yates. And the person who hurt them is left with the life they chose, which is not revenge in any deliberate sense, but which is in the most profound and final way, justice. Let me bring in something from behavioral science that I think puts all of this into extremely sharp focus. There is research on what is called the contrast effect, E8s. The contrast effect is how the same thing, the same person, the same quality appears different depending on what it is being compared to. When you are in the presence of something genuinely good, E8s, genuinely warm, genuinely understanding, you may not fully recognize what you have because you have nothing to contrast it with. But when it is gone, E8s, and especially when what replaces it is ordinary or difficult or cold, the contrast makes the loss feel much larger than it might have seemed in the moment. The empath, for the person who hurt them, E8s, becomes the contrast. Every future relationship, every future conversation, every future moment of feeling misunderstood or lonely or emotionally alone carries the ghost of what the empath offered, E8s. And that ghost does not diminish easily. In some cases, it does not diminish at all. That is not a comfortable thing to sit with, E8s, which is why I want to be very clear that I am not describing this as something empaths consciously design or deliberately execute. The empath is not calculating any of this. D8s. They are simply choosing themselves. They are simply growing. They are simply living well. The effect on the person who hurt them is a natural consequence of the loss of something genuinely valuable. D8s, combined with the very visible evidence that life without the person who hurt them is better. That evidence accumulates over time. It becomes undeniable, D8s, and the person left behind is forced to sit with it. Now, I want to speak directly to the empaths watching this, because I know some of you are in the middle of something right now, D8s. Some of you are in that painful place where you have given everything, absorbed everything, tried to understand and forgive and stay in hope, and you are exhausted. D8s, you are wondering whether you are being too sensitive, whether you should try harder, whether the problem is you. And I want to say something clearly and directly to you. The exhaustion you feel is not a character flaw. It is information. Radiates. It is your nervous system and your intuition and your emotional intelligence all finally agreeing with each other and sending you a signal that what you are in the middle of is not sustainable, is not reciprocal, and is not worthy of the investment you have been making. You are not too sensitive. You are too aware to keep pretending that what is happening is acceptable. Radiates. And the moment you stop pretending, the moment you make the quiet, firm, total decision to withdraw from what is diminishing you, something remarkable begins. It's the energy you have been hemorrhaging into a relationship that is taking more than it is giving begins returning to you, slowly at first, then faster, radiates, and with it comes a clarity you had almost forgotten was possible. A clarity about who you are, what you value, what you deserve, and who actually deserves to be in your presence. Idiots. Because here's the truth about empaths that the person who hurt them will eventually have to live with. You were not easy to find. The depth of presence you offered, D8s, the quality of understanding you provided, the genuine care you brought to every interaction, that is not something that is simply replaced. It is not something the other person can find again easily. E8s, maybe not at all. And while you are building something extraordinary with your freedom, they are discovering for the first time what it means to be truly, fully, quietly, without drama, without argument, D8s, without even a goodbye that made sense without you. That is not revenge, that is reckoning. And it is far more permanent. The final thing I want to leave you with is this, D8s. If you have been hurt by an empath's withdrawal, if you are the person standing outside the door that no longer leads anywhere, radiates, there is only one thing worth doing, and it has nothing to do with the empath. It has to do with you. Because the question worth asking is not how do I get them back? It's the question worth asking is what did I do with someone who offered me something genuinely rare? And why did I treat it as if it were ordinary? That question, honestly faced, idiots, is the only productive response to the situation. Not because the empath is waiting for you to answer it. They are not E8s, but because how you answer it will determine whether you are capable of honoring something real, if you are ever fortunate enough to encounter it again. And if you are the empath, if you are the one who has made the quiet decision, the one who has finally withdrawn, the one who is in the early stages of that transformation, I want you to know something, E8s. What you are doing takes more courage than any act of visible revenge. It requires you to trust your own perception at the exact moment someone else has been working to undermine it. Radiates. It requires you to choose yourself at the exact moment when part of you still wants to choose them. It radiates. It requires you to believe in your own value at the exact moment when pain is making that belief difficult. But every step you take forward is evidence. It's evidence that what was done to you did not define you. Evidence that your capacity for depth and love and understanding was never the problem. Evidence that the right people, 88s, the people worth giving that rare gift to, are still out there. And they deserve the version of you that has been through this. The version that has learned discernment. E8s, the version that has stopped confusing access with connection. The version that knows at a cellular level that your presence is not something to be offered carelessly. Empaths do not get revenge. They do something that takes longer, costs more, requires deeper reserves of courage, and produces results that last far beyond any single act of retaliation ever could. They become undeniable. They become free. They become the living proof that what was done to them was the other person's greatest mistake. And they do it all without ever making a single move designed to hurt anyone. They simply refuse to stop growing, and eventually the world notices. The right people notice, and the wrong ones are left with exactly what they chose, which was never, in the end, close to enough.